Welcome to the It's Time podcast with your host, Professor Dale Feinauer, from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs.
And that's where stress comes from. It's internal.
Yeah.
Stress is not an external factor. Stress is totally an internal.
Mm-hmm.
So you can feel stress or not feel stress. That's up to you.
You're going to have some. Stress is way different than pressure. Way, way different. Stress when you don't know what to do. Like I said, pressure is the privilege of leadership. If you're under pressure and you're the leader, and I just said this to this class on Saturday. That's a privilege of being the leader. If you can't take that, you shouldn't be in the job. It's just part of it. So don't redefine that as stress. Look at it as a privilege. And then I heard a dozen stories on why I'm wrong. And I go, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that's a way to look at it. So, it's a good question.
There's some good stuff out there now on regrets. That regrets don't have to be a source of stress and a negative. Sure, I have regrets. There's things that I wish I had done differently. But if those regrets turn into beating myself up in stress, that's a negative. If those regrets are, what can I learn from that? And how does that give me energy to try the next one? Then the regret turns into a positive. It's again a question of, in your head, how is it playing itself out? We've all got stuff that we wish we'd done differently.
Absolutely.
But learn from it, take the lesson, you paid the damn tuition, at least get the lesson, and then figure out how to move forward and use that to create some energy. Use it to create a certain jazz. Grief. There's some folks that will argue that grief can be a great source of incentive to do something new and different with your life. What else you got?
So what was Menashe actually struggling with all the CEOs? I have an idea of something like finding that time there. What were the main problems?
Well, that's the first time I've got that question. I know exactly what it is. And it's a complete and utter disregard for clarity, alignment, execution. So the company had drifted into, when I was there, I'm sorry, I cut your name, Nick. Nick, there were 6 divisions and 15 or 18 companies in all kinds of different things. Very, very diversified company. It was in plastics and trees and trays and labels and you name it. So it was very minimal clarity on where we should go with the company. With 150 private company shareholders of 6 generations. So some wanted, a philanthropic strategy. Some wanted a bigger house on the lake. So you had 6 generations of differing needs. And I think each of the CEOs was trying to, maneuver the company to fit into multiple generational needs. And you couldn't do it. You couldn't meet all those different shareholder needs because they wanted something so different. So that led to lots of internal stress. And then that led to changing someone, who led to changing another guy. And then everyone tried to figure that model out. And then the guy that's there now sort of figured out, what do we really want to be? And they got rid of all of those companies except for 2, Orbis and the Menashe Packaging. And there might be something else in there, but essentially 2 companies instead of a dozen. So clarity. And then obviously getting people lined up around 2 companies. And here's what we're going to go do to drive shareholder value, way easier to execute. And so that's what Jim Kotek did and still doing it. So I think is the board and the shareholders and the company just struggled with their identity. There was an exchange of leaders who all were doing their best. They're all good people trying to do the best they could, but the clarity piece wasn't nailed down, and therefore alignment's fragmented. and everyone's trying to run for cover and get this done and get that done. But they held it all together, and the companies, it worked through it. These big family companies are pretty tough, to run because they're really investments in their portfolio versus family companies where the families are in there running them. So it gets more complicated, and that's one of the big ones. Menasha Corp's huge, family company. Great success story, by the way. I think one of the all-time, my favorite success story in the Fox Cities. And I give the current CEO a lot of it, despite the fact he's a great friend of mine. I think he and Mike Waite and the rest of those guys, Bill Ash, all of them I know well, they've done a great job with that place. But it took stable leadership to get there. I mean, think about it. If you're in this class and you have if you had a different leader every week, every month, it's hard to gain any traction. And the company, it just went into one of those, moats for a while. And previously it had a succession of really good tenured leaders. And then all of a sudden it was one every other year, which caused the company to spin. But they made it through because there was a lot of good people there. Good question.
And now, a few words about some of the programs and services offered by the UW-Oshkosh College of Business.
The University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh offers the first of its kind MBA executive program in Northeast Wisconsin. Cohorts meet on weekends at the Appleton Executive Education Center with options available in a 12 or 16-month timeline. The results-driven MBA executive program provides an education that is both relevant and actionable, so you can take the knowledge you learn on Saturday and immediately apply it at work on Monday. No GRE or GMAT required. See if the MBA executive program is right for you by visiting uwo.sh/EMBA. That's uwo.sh/EMBA. It's time to achieve more with a graduate degree from UW-Oshkosh.
Where have you faced culture that you needed to change? How'd you change it? And how did you re-engage or engage people?
Yeah.
There's just dozens of these. I think let me give you an example of one that wasn't one I was directly involved in, but it was very visual. Two of them actually that helped me really change. And one, which is in this podcast, so I'm going to repeat it. But when I was a young guy and running these tax returns and succession planning, all the stuff I did at Arthur Andersen, one of my clients was a company called Western States Envelope. Did you make them listen to this podcast?
They could listen to anyone they wanted,
Okay.
But I don't think any of them picked yours.
I would hope not. It's 2 hours long, as you can tell. So I'm at this company called Western States Envelope. They make envelopes. This is a long, long, long time ago. Most of you guys weren't even born. This is 1986, all right? I'm young, extremely cocky. This is back when what's the fastest I can get promoted, And I'm a little over my skis running this audit tax assignment for Western States Envelope. And the owner of the company is a 6'9" guy named French Moss. Very ultimate Southern gentleman. And, but just an enormous, really tall, intimidating guy, but the nicest man. And I've known him for a couple of years, and I don't have many bathroom stories, thankfully, but I'm in the men's bathroom. And I'm sitting at the sink, and in walks French. And he starts wiping down the mirror. Okay? He's a big guy. He's wiping the mirror down like this. And I'm over here. He's over here. I'm going, hey, French, you know what? We got people for this stuff, And he looks down at me. He goes, in my office now. I went, oh, shit. I didn't even know what I did. And he had this big palatial office the size of this room with a great big sort of desk and just what you would expect, right? And this big 6'9" guy, and he sits on the end of his desk while I'm sitting in the chair, just shrinking like this. And he looks at me and he shuts his door. And I didn't even know what I did. He goes, I really thought you had a chance. I really thought you were kind of special, Jim. You had the it factor. But you know what I concluded today? You don't have a chance at all. You don't get it. And I don't know if you ever will. And I mean, you're literally reduced to just emotional rubble. Because first of all, I thought he was going to call my boss and call in the partner. And then he went on to explain the day the day you're too good to clean the mirror, you don't understand what it takes to lead. You definitely don't understand what it takes to have the right culture. So what he taught me that day was what you do, what you don't do, what you say, what you don't say. But his point was, you're too good to clean the mirror. You will never lead anything in your life. And if you don't get that through your head right now, it's never going to work for you. Not exactly the question you asked, but it was one of those culture moments for me where that's how he ran the whole company. The whole company, he ran that way. And I at that moment sort of became a student of this cultural soft stuff. And he kind of scared me. He just sort of scared me. He's just a big guy. I thought he was going to call my boss. And what he was really trying to do, and Harry Osenberg did that with me. I'll tell you that my other story here at Oshkosh, if we get to it, but there's a few people in your life that just grabbed you by the back of your shirt and said, I'm not going to let you go down, pulled you up and set you over here. He was one of them. So that was an example of what I saw as sort of culture and leadership. The other big one.
Just and go with Harry, but let me clarify that with culture, it's those stories. You don't create culture by sending out a memo that says,
right,
we're going to be concerned about individuals, or we're going to do X. It's probably not even the speech the CEO gives. It's that kind of moment where other people in the organization are like, oh, that's important. I see that that's important because the CEO just didn't tolerate this kind of behavior. Oh, this person made that mistake, but it wasn't a problem. Oh, you can do that. You can make a legitimate judgment mistake. That doesn't get you shot. But treating somebody without respect, that gets you shot. All right, now I understand the culture in this organization. This is really important. Yeah, I can take some risk over here. And that was one of those signature moments that stays in your mind and stays in other people's minds.
It's a Menasha Corp story. This is a little bit more to your point. So we're on like we're going through this change, one of the many changes, and the chairman of the board stepped in as the CEO, one of my all-time favorite people on the planet, Tom Prosser. And anyone know Tom? He's a legendary guy around the Fox Cities. Anyway, so he fires the CEO, comes out of his chair role to become CEO. And we're in the Menasha Corp boardroom, which most of you wouldn't know because the building's new now. But when I was there was one of these 1950s boardrooms. Just picture, 14 feet high, all dark walnut paneling with the pictures of all the previous CEOs on the wall with their eyes looking at you. So they did paintings of all the previous. It's a 170-year-old company. So it's the most ominous, overwhelming room you'll ever be in. Big leather chairs, a dark black 25-foot-long desk just to set up the environment. And these pictures, you swear to God, the eyes are moving. And above the door, it says executive conference room, which is really critical to this culture story. So this is Tom's first day as CEO. He walks in and he either removed or taped over or did something. He goes, I declare this is no longer the executive conference room. It's now the leadership conference room. You are the leadership team. You're not the executives. Never again shall we use that word in this company. We are the leaders. This is not the executive anything. We're part of the organization. We're not the executives. And he literally, and he goes, and we had little signs in front of our names, executive this, and we got rid of them all and basically said, if anyone doesn't get this, leave now, because we will never do this again. And his whole point was to do a full cultural shift from the previous CEO, who did not think that way. And Tom changed the culture of the whole company. And in our ceremony when he was going back to chairman and we hired his successor, one of the owners stood up and was, applauding Tom and what he had done, and they said, and I quote, he may very well have saved this company, and all he did was change our name. That's it. That's it. So you don't overthink this stuff. It's what you tolerate, and the company tolerated this we're bigger than you mentality, and we're executives and everyone else isn't. The company tolerated that behavior, and therefore that's how we ran the place. I think I was like 36. I didn't know what was even going on. I'm just trying to, how do I get out of this meeting without getting fired? But I remember these kinds of visual stories about culture, and it was just the way from that point on, it was a complete shift. Then we got into selling off companies and re-narrowing the focus, sort of tactical stuff. But that day, the company did a 180 and no one even knew it except for him. So I got 2 dozen stories on culture, but those are two that just ring in my ears. Personally, I especially when I've got into some foreign markets where, business practices are different. I'm gonna leave it at that. Those were very difficult cultures to adjust because you don't do business in other markets the way you do it in the U.S. in some cases. So sometimes culture you're going to change, and here's why. It's not a question mark because business practices are so different. So those are stories probably not for a podcast, but there are, studying culture is a pretty big deal, and it is not the plaques on the wall, it's not the company emails or whatever we proclaim. It's just what behavior do you tolerate? That's your culture. You're gonna tolerate people being too cocky to bleed from the back. You're gonna tolerate executive versus.
Okay, why don't you
Go ahead,
read
man.
one off?
First one from Debbie is, tell us about the hardest decision you've ever made as a leader. How did you decide which course of action was best?
Every single one of them were people related. Everyone. I mean, the best acquisitions I've ever done are the ones I didn't do. So there's all those things, but it's been the hardest specifically was having to let go of people that were your friends, especially in a community the size of Fox Cities, because they're not your friends anymore, and they won't talk to you for 15 years, and their wife won't talk to you forever. So the hardest decisions were, leaders, it's not about being popular. It's about doing what you need to do to lead and for the betterment of the whole place. So there's been a handful of really senior leaders that I've had part ways with. Sometimes they were 20 years older than me. Sometimes one of them ended up at Data Care with a heart attack. I mean, it's endless. Of every one of them was tough. If you fire a 50-year-old man, it's the emotional equivalent of him losing his spouse. Okay? I don't know if you've taught this in your HR. It's the emotional equivalent of having your spouse die. That's how intense this stuff is.
Changing employer is a greater source of stress than changing spouse. We had that discussion a couple weeks ago.
And I don't know that I believed that at the time. It is absolutely true. So all of my toughest decisions were what was the right thing to, and I did not get all these right, you guys. I did not get them all right. There's a couple of them. Talk about regrets, where I let a couple of people go. I just shouldn't have done it. But at the time, I thought it was the right thing to do. In retrospect, probably not. I don't know if I was too young, didn't have enough facts, didn't think enough, didn't think 360 enough. But all these tough decisions you're ever going to make in your life, they're all going to be people related. You kept someone too long, got rid of someone too fast, you didn't create enough clarity. And every person I ever fired, and I've hired 100 times more than I fired, every person I ever let go, I looked in the mirror and held myself accountable. Every single person, I put it on me. I didn't lead right. I didn't coach right. Expectations weren't right. I didn't hold them accountable. I was too accountable. But I always took the heat. Leadership 101. Take the blame, give the credit every single time. So all these regrets are our own people. So whatever you're going to do, just think through it. And then when you're done thinking through it, think through it again. But, as one of my friends once said, take your time, but move your ass. And so he's the owner of one of the big companies around here, and one of my big customers, who used to, sort of accuse me of being too slow. And maybe I was. And on some of these people issues, I just think you got to be careful with them, because you're talking about people's lives here. However, your job as the leader is to deliver results, to be courageous, to do what's right for the organization, which might not be right for that person. And if you don't have the courage to do that kind of stuff, you can't lead. If it's about being popular, get out. Don't even start.
And it's a tough balance. I said, stress is internal and you can control that and et cetera. But if you ever get to the point in your life where firing people is easy, there's a problem. That's terrible. If you ever get to the point in your life where you can't fire somebody who needs to go for the good of the organization, that's terrible. And being able to take that ownership of this is a terrible thing. Yeah, maybe I could have coached different, et cetera. But even if it's totally on them, this is still a person with a spouse and with kids and house payments and car payments, and you're totally upending their lives. And if you can do that easily, that's a problem. But if you can't do it, that's also, and you got to continue to feel pain when you do it, because if you don't, you're not making these good decisions and you're not creating the right culture, but you still got to pull the trigger when it's necessary. And I don't know how you balance those two. I don't know what the key is to say, I always made the decision at just the right time, I felt the right amount of ownership, et cetera.
You'll never get it right.
But
it's minimizing the wrongs. But
yeah.
Those would be absolutely my biggest decisions. And these were, company presidents, big time, some people that were in their roles for 20 years, sometimes longer. So removing them from their role was complicated and difficult, but it was the right thing to do to expand the bandwidth of the organization. We needed different leadership, and usually you let it go a year or two too long, and every employee knows what the right answer is, and your leadership erodes pretty fast when you don't make decisions on people. So I regret some of the moves I made. I regret some of the pace in which I made them, sometimes too fast, sometimes too long. What I don't regret is having the confidence and courage to know what to do, because it's lonely as hell sitting in those chairs, you guys. It's really lonely, especially when you get into the big decisions. So that would be
my hardest fire. Was when I was at a restaurant, assistant manager. And the manager of the restaurant, who was great at many things, but terrible at others, had hired a woman to be one of the wait staff. Hired a person, gender doesn't matter. Hired this person to be part of the wait staff. But her first day was the day that I was the assistant manager. The problem was she was fundamentally blind. She had very, very limited sight. I mean, legally she was blind. There was no training. We had no ability to figure out how we could possibly have a wait staff who could, just put down what the orders were that would get them to the kitchen. No way that she could figure out how to get the food from A to B. I thought, okay, maybe she can just, get the drinks for the other people, but she couldn't read the things here to figure out. It was clear that this was just not going to work. I mean, your heart bled for this poor girl who was trying to find a way to have a job, but there was no practical way that she was ever going to succeed as a waitstaff person in that restaurant. It just wasn't going to happen. And so her first day on the job, I fired this blind girl. And I hadn't thought about that for 20 years.
Nice job, Dale.
But
What'd you do with the deaf girl? That's terrible. Then you have to live with that.
oh yeah, and
Well.
it was you feel like an absolute ass
Yeah.
for doing it, but
That's the essence of big decisions. They're all about people.
And now, a few words about some of the programs and services offered by the UW-Oshkosh College of Business.
The University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh Master of Business Administration program is powerfully positioned to help you advance your career. Join a strong network of more than 3,700 UWO MBA alumni in the Fox Valley and beyond, and take pride in earning a quality business degree from an AACSB-accredited institution. Courses are led by award-winning faculty and industry experts, helping you develop personally and professionally during your time here. Take the first step toward an MBA by visiting uwo.sh/MBA to see all that UW-Oshkosh has to offer. That's uwo.sh/MBA. Apply today.
So first of all, I'm encouraged to hear the relation to this. That, you can look at a CEO and be like, they don't get bothered by that stuff, letting people go, which is obviously not true. So what is your advice? When there's a person, and they might be a good person, but your intuition and there's a theme where you're concerned they're not right for the role, they're not right for the team, they're not doing things absolutely inappropriate or compromising, but you know something's not there. So what is your advice then in making the tough decision to have to get rid of somebody?
Well, first off, I would say, have you done everything you can to be intensely clear on expectations? Because sometimes when you get into this, you were never clear on the front end of what the expectations were, or you weren't aligned on how they were supposed to be executed. Then something doesn't happen, but you didn't do the first two steps. So the first thing is making sure you're totally clear and convinced expectations are in place and you both mutually understand it. And if that doesn't work and expectations don't, in your gut, it's just never going to happen. It's too late already. That's the problem with this stuff, right? By the time you get it all figured out, you're a year late, and everyone else knows you're a year late, and that's what eats up the organization. We have a case going on in our strategy class right now. One of our EMBA students has a coworker. These are pretty senior levels, who's absolutely a cultural misfit, creates drama, doesn't get this done, doesn't get that done, but a pretty good subject matter expert, which is what causes these problems. Because let's pick Jerry as a subject matter expert, a chemical engineer who knows everything, but is a divisive, destructive teammate, and we don't have time for that anymore. So the problem with it is you're always late. By the time you figure it out, you're too late. So if you're clear on expectations and you've done a couple of performance improvement discussions, because there's a lot of HR issues that go with
Just for the legal, but also for the ethical, you want to give them a shot.
Right? You're generally going to give people a shot. Which what I would always do is, here's your expectation. What are your expectations of me, so that you can meet yours? And if those things don't come together, it may not be out the door. It might be just you got someone in the wrong role. We are Peter principling people all the time right now, because we got virtual employees, we got semi-virtual employees, we got offsite organizations. It's really getting impossible, you guys. I don't know how. I'm kind of glad I'm done, because I don't know how you're going to run companies with nobody around. With all due respect to everybody on the phone right now, how do you run a company when you can't connect with human beings? That's another topic I'm going to hold off on for a minute, because I want to ask you guys a question. But just don't delay the inevitable, because everybody's watching and wondering why you're so stupid.
And I would make a huge separation between the cultural fit question and the technical skills. And there are a lot of these 9-box and different grids and ways you can look at this thing. But fundamentally, if a person's not a cultural fit, I'm going to make sure the expectations are clear. I'm going to do everything I can on alignment. I'm going to try and do the performance improvement plan. I'm going to do all that. But I'm going to do that pretty quickly. And if there isn't a significant change, I'm going to make a move pretty damn quick. Because lack of cultural fit,
you can't fix.
Rarely change.
You can't fix it. Generally, you can't fix it, which puts a huge premium on how you hire and who you hire and why you hire and the questions you ask. Normally when we hire, it's subject matter expertise, background, technical capability. That's sort of the funnel, the stage gate of hiring. I would invert it and start with culture and work down instead of the other way around, because that's what will kill you. The technical stuff you either have or don't have, you will figure that out pretty quick. The cultural stuff, the problem with a cultural misfit is they are contagious. It just sends a, sort of a shockwave through an organization, and it's usually not good. So once you see it, you got to do something. Because the next thing you know, you got 10 problems. And here's my question risk to you guys. If you're 50% virtual or 90% virtual or whatever it is, 3 things that I worry about for all of you. How will you develop people if it's just linear, if it's just on a Zoom call? Because developing people is way more complicated than that. How will you innovate? Since most innovation is unplanned. It's a collaborative, you guys know this, it's a collaborative accident half the time. And how will you innovate when you're not integrated? And then I think most companies have found a way to work virtually and deliver the fundamental performance you need, right? That we figured that out over the last couple of years. The pandemic really sped that up. But it's hard for me to think you're going to get breakthrough performance or incrementally breakthrough performance when you're not physically integrated. So how are you going to coach, lead, and teach? How are you going to innovate? And how are you going to get breakthrough results when your organization is scattered all over? I am not asking you to answer that, but I'm not smart enough to figure out how would I run Bemis if I was faced with this, knowing that if I take too hard of a line, 30% of my employees just aren't going to show up. It's easy to talk smack in a room at Sage Hall at 8 o'clock at night. But the reality is, if you get too overly balanced one way or the other, you could lose a lot of employees. So that, I think you guys this is a whole class unto itself, Dale. How are you going to work through this?
And the fourth question I would add, and it's there in your development one, and you've raised the point of you're just going to lose them. How do you deal with the non-performing? I mean, the growth performance is one thing, and the development, how are we going to get people to move up the food chain? But my perception is it's a whole lot harder to identify the employees not performing, to identify some of the why, and to figure out sort of how do I get them to grow? How do I get them to move into being solid? Or how do I make the decision to terminate? That if you're all in the office, you can see that they're not working. It's more obvious the dead wood. It's easier to hide when you got
your screen off and doing this. I mean, there's all kinds of software to track activity, but that's so fundamental. I think maybe even the bigger issue, though, that I've been hearing from all my counterparts and advisory clients is retention. Retention. I mean, that's like number one word on everyone's list is how do I keep my teams together? What am I going to do? And there's a study done by the University of Washington, I think it was, and they evaluated the 10 reasons people are thinking of leaving. And I'm going to get my numbers wrong here, but I think it's something like 7 or 8 out of every employee is thinking about or actively looking for a different job. It was always high. When you ask people, are you thinking about leaving? Well, sure. It was always in the 60s. Now it's like in the 70s, maybe 80s. And so then Pareto charted out all the reasons. Why would people be thinking about leaving? So let me ask the class here. What do you think the number 1 reason and the number 10 reason? Just give me a couple ideas.
Their current manager.
That's a good one.
Work-life balance.
That's a good one.
Underappreciated.
You just all hit them on the head. So not surprising, the number one reason people are leaving, and we're talking about pay a lot right now, that's not even remotely it. It's the lack of engagement with their employer, and they don't feel needed. However you want to say that. Your boss is a SOB, you're not engaged, no one's listening to you, however you want to say it. But the interesting thing in the survey or the study was pay was number 10. Okay. Number 10 versus number 1. What I took away from this was the delta. So they measured this, right? Pay was 1/5 of the reason versus engagement. 5 to 1. And historically, they've been more like 1 to 1. So the takeaway from this is you aren't going to be able to pay people to avoid retention issues. You cannot give 8% raises or whatever inflation's at right now, 7.9.
Doesn't matter if you do.
You're not going to keep them because they can go over here, here, here. I can leave, go get a different job. If it doesn't work, I'll come right back for a raise. So you're not going to retain them with comp. You're going to only retain them with engagement, which is largely about leadership, which is why I'm sitting here. You pay people for their hands, right? Whatever you guys do. Amcor, Menasha Corp, you pay, how many employees are there in Amcor? 40,000 or something? It's an enormous number. And you pay them for their hands. But what you really want are their hearts and minds. That's where all the value is. It's not this, that's where you get the 1 + 1 = 3 performance. So if you can figure out how to build in some of that into your process, if you can remember, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. You've heard that, right? That if you take nothing away from this night, remember that. It will work every single time. 100 out of 100. So if you can't keep people with comp and you can't retain them with something, you're going to be far better off being a better engaged listener. Lead with your ears. Make sure you lead from the back. Make sure you're humble. And for God's sakes, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And if you can actually sincerely do that, you have a chance of being successful. If you do that, but you're not sincere, you're going to be like me in the Western States bathroom, dealing with someone else that's going to explain it to you. But I wish someone had taught me some of this stuff when I was your age, and versus having to figure it all out.
And the research makes it clear that if you get that right, making mistakes on some of the other aspects of leadership, you get pretty high forgiveness. If you don't get that right, if you don't get engagement right, if you don't get treating people with dignity and respect right, you make a little mistake on any of the technical aspects of should we have done that merger, should we have done this, should we have done that, and you get fried.
Well,
you're buying huge forgiveness.
Let's also stay balanced here. If you do all that, and you're perfect at being a high EQ leader, I mean, absolutely the best, and you don't deliver results, you're still going to get fired. 100 out of 100 times in a public company. In a private company, you're still going to get fired. It might take a little longer. So don't for a minute think you can soft your way through all this. I would tell you, though, the more humble you are, the more self-aware you are, the better, servant leader you are. The odds are you're going to get better results.
Because people are going to be willing to walk into your office and say, Jim, I think this idea you got here, I think this one's really dumb. Yep. Let's talk about it. Where if you're an arrogant, they won't walk into your office and say that. And even Jim sometimes has bad ideas and needs somebody to walk into his office and say,
49% of the time they were bad.
Dale, I think you're ready to make a mistake. And if your staff won't look you dead in the eye and say, Dale, I think you're ready to do something really stupid, and you're not willing to take a deep breath and say, okay, maybe I am, let's think about it, you're ability to perform is going to be way more limited. You're not going to get the results you'd get as if you had all those people around you helping you figure out how to move forward.
And the other thing about engagement and humility and leadership, it's free. It's free. You don't have to do it. You don't have to spend anything. You don't have to go buy a plant. You don't need to, invest in a price cut. You don't have to, execute some innovation model. It's free. That's what I'm just amazed how many people flatline this topic. I mean,
it's not only free, it buys you stuff with the employees. Yeah. The employees would rather have a boss who wants them to engage than a boss who ignores their ideas. So it reduces turnover. It has all these other benefits, and it doesn't cost you anything.
So I got a lot of little one-liner facts for you guys, but on this very topic, someone on the call here said, people, why are people thinking about leaving their boss, right? Well, Mayo Clinic did a study. Have you guys seen this? Probably not, because why would you? So Mayo Clinic did a study on the impact of your boss versus your doctor on your health. Okay? Here's your doctor, here's your boss. So which of you smart people can guess the ratio? And I wouldn't be telling this if there wasn't a gap here. What is the impact of your boss versus your doctor in a ratio? Someone throw a number out there. 1-to-1, half to 1?
4-to-1.
Okay. 5. It was 4-to-1 2 years ago. Kind of maybe 3, like pre-pandemic. Now it's 5.1. So your boss, which you guys might be bosses or you report to bosses who need your coaching, your boss is 500% more impactful on your health than your doctor. And I never thought about that. But if you think about that, that's why people quit. They can't stand the boss.
It's a perfectly rational thing to do.
Very few people quit their job. They quit their boss because he or she's just or they quit the company because the culture sucks. Most of the time, you don't quit your job. Not always.
Oh, it's usually fun. And it works the other way around. You also can be exceedingly loyal to your boss. I have way more loyalty to not only bosses, but to mentors, to the people who've helped me in my career. Recently deceased, but a former chancellor of this university who was wonderful to me, a very great mentor. Ed Penson would have called me up and said, Dale, I need you next Friday to come here to Athens and help me with something. I said, oh, okay, Ed. Am I wearing a suit because we're doing a consult, or am I wearing jeans and bringing a shovel because we're burying a body? I mean, but if Ed Penson wanted something, I'd have been there. Do I feel loyalty to Oshkosh University? Ed Penson, yes. Barb Rao, yes. But that's where you feel loyalty.
It goes back to this whole thing's about people and how you manage relationships. And one last Tom Prosser story, because you just reminded me of it. So this is the guy, the executive, the whole thing. He was been my mentor. He's now got some challenges, but my mother had a stroke, a really bad one. And my dad was, they're married for 55 years, and my mother has this horrible stroke, and then she passed away. And so I do my monthly meetings with Tom, and I'm telling him all this stuff, and he goes, how's your dad doing? I go, horrible. I don't know if it could be any worse. He's just diving into the abyss as fast as he can. And Tom's wife, as unfortunately, had a stroke 15 years earlier, but she lived for about 12 years. So he had been taking care 10 or 15 years, I don't know how long, had been taking care of his very, very health challenged wife for a decade. And then she passed away. So we're sitting there having breakfast, and I'm telling him this. He goes, I think I should meet with your dad. What? He goes, yeah, I think he needs someone to talk to, and he doesn't know it. And I'm the guy, and I went through all this, and I think I need to get in the car, drive down to Fond du Lac, and just start having breakfast with him now and then and help him get through this. Do you think it's emotional even tell. Do you think there's anything on this planet I wouldn't do for this guy? Anything? I mean, name it. I'd do it. if you can ever get to the point where you have that kind of powerful relationship with people, you can expand bandwidths to levels no one thought was ever possible. You can get organizations to do things that plant and equipment and expansion and acquisitions will never do. So an extraordinarily long answer to your question. I apologize, but I'm trying to fit in, 4 weeks of four credit leadership class into one night here.
Let me tell Brian Brandt's story, and I know you're a huge fan of Brian Brandt in terms of his leadership skills. But I go to Oshkosh Corp and I meet with Brian Brandt, who's, I don't know, what's his role in Oshkosh Corp?
The chief marketing officer.
Okay, so he's hugely up the food chain.
Head of transformational management. So he's trying to take the culture shift.
So way up the food chain at Oshkosh Corp. And he's agreed with me to meet with me because I want to talk to him about this business leadership thing I got going and one thing and another and would he teach for us and et cetera. And my phone rings. And I say, excuse me, Brian, I got to take this phone call. And I took the phone call because it was one of my sons, Evan, who teaches in the MBA program, who had a son who was born very prematurely and was a source of I didn't know if my grandson was living or not when the phones ring. So that's the phone call you take. And so I take the phone call and I talk to my son for a little bit and everything's okay. And I go back and I explained to Brian, I felt guilty about the fact that I've interrupted this meeting to take this personal phone call, and so I felt I owed him some explanation. So I explained to Brian what's going on, things are better, et cetera, et cetera. Great, fine. Brian's very understanding. 45 minutes later, I'm leaving the building, and Brian says, "Now, what was your grandson's name again?" Sterling James Feinauer. He said, "Thank you. I need to know the name, so I'll put him in my list of people I'm praying for." Now, why is he doing that? How much does that impact me that in this moment when I'm scared as hell, here's this guy who, he's doing me a favor meeting with me, and he's saying, I'm going to do something. Let me pray for your grandson.
And that's who he is. I mean, it's who he is. And there's a lot of people like that you met in your life, but he's in a rare air. So this guy reported to me for 15 years. And Oshkosh comes along with a job bigger than I had. And he left. And the day he came in to tell me that he was leaving, right? He walks in the door in my office in Oshkosh, and there's tears coming down his eyes like this, and I knew exactly what happened. He was leaving. But finding those kinds of relationships are critical, whether you're the giver or the taker. But back to you guys.
Well, I'm going to do one more example.
Do we need a break or something?
We're going to take a break in a minute. Cameraman, why don't you come on down here? So we're getting ready to do the Tim Bergstrom interview, and we're doing a podcast. And there's 3 or 4 or 5 folks, whatever it was, that were down at the Venture Project to do all of the recording. But before Tim's going to do the podcast, he wants to meet everybody. So he meets this young man here, and he says, well, tell me about yourself. And they says, oh, I noticed this necklace you got. That's kind of an interesting necklace. And you indicated that?
I am Native American, and it was made by my grandmother.
And Tim asked the question, well, do you see her much? And your response was?
Not necessarily, because she kind of lives a little far, so yeah.
And she was in a hospital?
Yep, she was sick at the time as well, so.
And what's Tim Bergstrom's response? He said, well, is the reason you're not getting up to see her that you don't have a vehicle? Do you need a car? He was not selling a car to this man. He was going to say, if you need a car, if the reason you cannot get up there to the reservation, to the hospital to see your grandmother is a lack of transportation, as he put it, I have cars. And yes, the man has cars. And I don't know if he was going to give you one to use for the day. I don't know if he was going to have a driver take you up. I don't know what was going to happen. But if your response had been, yeah, lack of transportation is the reason I'm not getting up to see my grandmother, there was no doubt in my mind, I don't know if there's any doubt in yours,
No, he would have for sure.
he would have done whatever it would have taken to get you up there to see your grandmother.
And
This
where,
is
where are you going to buy your next car?
Right?
right, but he's not doing that to sell a car. This guy's a student at Fox Valley Tech, right?
Just graduated, but
Just graduated. At that point, you were.
Yep.
This is not a guy who's going to be immediately buying a Lexus
Or a fleet.
or a fleet
Right.
or anything else. I mean, he's, maybe a used car, but this isn't a salesperson at work. This is human being connecting to human being. And that is the kind of stuff that you don't fake. But if you can learn to do that, if you can make that part of who you are, if that's part of being positive, part of engaging and being engaged with your employees, making those kind of connections, it's going to go a huge way in terms of your ability to run the organization. Was that all fair?
That was funny when he was telling that story too. I was thinking that
You were thinking about that
same
story.
one. Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to say something about that. So.
Well, and that's why I stepped out, because I didn't want to tell the story without your permission, but okay. All right. On that note, shall we take a break?
It's Time is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs in association with Venture Project Studios. Executive producer, Aaron J. Armstrong. Host, Professor Dale Feinauer. Creative Director, Madison Potratz. Director of Photography, Elazar Kloon. Audio and Video Editor, Elazar Kloon. Marketing Strategy, Tara Larson. Social Media, Anwar Mahana. A special thanks to L Creative, Top View Media, Michael Patton, and the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs.